The Great Artesian Basin is a pretty special place, and yet most of us know very little about it. It's one of the real natural wonders of our nation. Covering 22% of Australia's land mass, it's the world's largest underground potable water source, a relic of Australia's ancient geology when a large inland sea formed, entering from North Queensland. That sea is long gone, but the Great Artesian Basin is its modern incarnation. It covers 79% of Queensland, but it also extends to parts of the Northern Territory, down as far as Dubbo and into Coober Pedy in South Australia. It's estimated to carry something like 65,000 cubic kilometres of water underground. That's a lot. And for a long time, rural Australians have been using it and farmers have depended on it. It's formed because of a special geological attribute, porous sandstone layered with impermeable or non-porous stone above the bedrock. The sandstone holds vast quantities of water that moves about throughout it, known as an aquifer. When it pops to the surface, it's what we call a natural spring. When humans actively seek to tap it, it's what we call a bore. Now, Glencore is seeking approval to inject 300,000 tonnes of carbon dioxide fluid into the precipice aquifer of the Great Artesian Basin at a trial site at Moonee in the Western Darling Downs of Queensland. In short, they want to use it to trial carbon capture and storage technology. To do it, they need Queensland's environmental regulations to change, which means we should always give a change like that careful scrutiny. The need for change might be the product of technological development and quite benign, or it could be a sign that this carries with it a risk of environmental harm about which we should tread carefully. Carbon capture and storage as a technology has not, at least in my research, been shown to present any risk to water or geology. The barrier to its widespread adoption has always been its high cost. That is to say, the science seems to work, it's just not commercial yet. But the member for Flynn, Colin Boyce, has raised concerns about the project, and I really wanted to get his perspective on what's needed to make sure that the interests of landholders and residents aren't prejudiced. Colin Boyce, welcome to the program. I know carbon capture and storage is touted as one of the ways in which technological solutions should be deployed to reduce Australia's carbon emissions. That is, it's an alternative to a carbon tax. But what's your concern with carbon capture and storage?
Well, the whole point to this, Amanda, is as Glencore themselves have identified in their technical water reports, they will compromise the receiving groundwater, and they cannot meet the current environmental standards. And that is why they need Section 41(2)(c) of the environmental regulations in Queensland changed to be allowed to be able to do this. Now, the issue I've got with that is that if these environmental regulations are indeed changed, that will open the gate and allow anybody to do the same thing. And with the advent of the recent safety net mechanism passed in federal parliament last week, you will see all of these 215 companies emitting 250,000 tonnes of carbon take up this technology, drill holes in the Great Artesian Basin and sequester potentially billions of tonnes of liquefied CO2 into the groundwaters of the Great Artesian Basin, which Glencore have said in their technical water report will compromise the water.
Help me understand that, Colin. In what way does the water get compromised? How bad is it? And is that the regulation that they're asking the Queensland government to change?
Well, if you put carbon dioxide into the water, it becomes carbonic acid. Carbonic acid then has an effect on that porous sandstone which you mentioned underground, and it can possibly dissolve all of the sedimentary rocks down there, and nobody really knows what will happen to the enormous plume of liquefied CO2 that'll be injected down there, what will become of it. Now, rural Queensland and rural Australia, for that matter, relies on this water source. It is the lifeblood of agriculture. And it is just absolute madness to be able to suggest that we're going to put this stuff down there and render this water source useless. The Great Artesian Basin is unique. It is the only one on the planet. There is nothing else like it.
And it seems to me that given we don't know the impact that it would have in this environment, it's something that needs to be tested before it goes into such a pristine and special place. It seems to me that carbon capture and storage is a big part of the story to keeping the heavy industry that's so important in your electorate viable, even though we are under a government that seems determined to price them out of existence. How do we reconcile those tensions that are faced by heavy industry in your part of the world?
Well, again, this all relates to the safeguard mechanism. Now, I'm not against carbon capture storage per se, but not into particularly the precipice sandstone water aquifer of the Great Artesian Basin, which is the deepest and the best water aquifer of the Great Artesian Basin. There are other options available to carbon sequestering, depleted oil wells, for an example, as they are doing in Bass Strait, for an example, as they are doing off the Western Australian coast. If they put it into these groundwaters that agricultural Australia relies on, that is just, a monumental disaster waiting to happen.
Well, there's some real common sense suggestions in what you've said there, and we do want to make sure that the technology's sorted before it gets used in a special place like the Great Artesian Basin. Colin Boyce, thank you so much for your time tonight.